Friday, December 5th, 1952. London wakes to fog, nothing out of the ordinary, until it chokes the life from the city. By evening, the air becomes lethal. In just 5 days, more than 1,800 people are dead, visibility has collapsed, and no one knows why. This wasn't ordinary weather. It was a toxic catastrophe. What turned London's air into poison? And who would survive the coming days? Within hours of the fog settling, London's hospitals faced a crisis. Emergency wards filled with people struggling to breathe, their lips turning blue, their lungs heavy with soot. Ambulance drivers navigated blindly, headlights useless in the thick air, forced to crawl at walking pace or abandon vehicles altogether. Calls for help poured in, but response times stretched into hours. Some patients arrived carried by neighbors or stumbled in on foot, coughing up black phlegm. Nurses and doctors worked without rest, improvising oxygen delivery as supplies dwindled. By the end of the first weekend, more than 4,000 people had died, most within just 5 days. The young, the frail, and the elderly suffered the most. Visibility dropped to barely 2 meters, even indoors. The city's rhythm broke down as panic set in. For many, nothing like this had ever been seen. The scale of the emergency was overwhelming, and no one could say how many more lives would be lost before the air cleared. A silent force had settled over London that December, the atmosphere itself turning against the city. High above the rooftops, an anticyclone pressed a lid of warm air down onto the cold ground. This invisible cap trapped everything beneath it, locking in the breath of millions of chimneys. Under normal conditions, smoke from coal fires, factories, and power stations would have risen and drifted away. But now, the city's exhaust had nowhere to go. Londoners burned coal for heat, and in 1952 most of it was low-grade, high-sulfur nutty slack. Households, factories, and power stations together sent a torrent of smoke and chemicals into the air, over 1 million tons of coal consumed in just 5 days. The result was a dense brew of sulfur dioxide, tar, and fine particles. Tarry soot clung to every molecule of moisture, giving the fog its sickly greenish-yellow tint. The air tasted metallic, stung the eyes, and left grit on skin and clothes. This was not the gentle mist of old novels. It was a toxic soup, created by a rare meteorological trap and the relentless burning of dirty coal. The city's heartbeat, its warmth, its industry, had turned lethal. In the stillness, the smog thickened, filling every space it could reach. No wind, no escape. The atmosphere itself had become an enemy, holding London in a poisonous embrace. By Friday afternoon, the smog had found its way inside. It crept through window frames and under doors, filling living rooms, shops, and even the grandest theaters. In cinemas across the West End, projectionists watched the beam from their reels vanish a few feet from the lens. The screen dissolved into a yellow haze, and the audience could barely make out the outlines of their own hands. Ushers moved through the aisles with flashlights, coughing as they tried to guide people out. Performances were abandoned mid-act. At the Colosseum, actors stepped onto the stage and disappeared into the murk, their voices muffled by the thick air. Musicians in orchestra pits struggled to read their scores, notes blurring under the dim yellow-green light. In schools, classrooms filled with the sharp tang of sulfur. Children rubbed their eyes and pressed handkerchiefs to their faces, but the smog clung to everything: books, desks, skin. By nightfall, people began to collapse indoors as well as out. Panic set in, not just on the streets, but behind closed doors, as Londoners realized the poisonous air would not be kept at bay. On the streets, London's familiar routines broke down. Cars sat abandoned in the middle of thoroughfares, their drivers defeated by the wall of yellowish-grey air. Buses inched forward with conductors walking ahead, waving flares to guide the way. Even the police struggled to keep order, their torches swallowed by the haze. The underground, deep below the chaos, became the city's last reliable artery. Trains ran packed, platforms overflowing, as people sought refuge from the choking air above. Yet for many, escape was impossible. At Smithfield Market, cattle penned for slaughter began to collapse, their lungs overwhelmed by the same poisonous air that filled the streets. Market workers tried to clear the animals, but the smog seeped into every corner. Reports tallied dozens of livestock deaths before the end of the weekend. Delivery drivers, unable to find their way, left milk and bread vans stranded at odd angles along the curb. In neighborhoods across London, the silence was broken only by the sound of coughing and the distant wail of ambulance sirens lost somewhere in the fog. The air carried a taste of metal. Every breath stung with the sharpness of tar, and grit settled on skin like a second layer of dust. For many, the smog was not just something seen, but something felt and tasted, a presence that invaded every corner of daily life. Jenny Watson was nearly 3 years old, living in London that winter. She remembers, even decades later, how yellow and sulfuric and scary it looked. The memory is more than a color, it is a sensation that never left her. Jenny was rushed to hospital with severe bronchitis, her small lungs fighting for air that offered no relief. She survived, but her breathing was never the same. The damage lingered, a reminder carried in every cough and wheeze long after the city cleared. Jenny's story echoes thousands of others, children and elderly overwhelmed by the poisonous air, families watching loved ones struggle for breath in their own homes. The smog's true cost was measured not just in numbers, but in the lives it changed forever. Official reports in the weeks after the smog put the death toll at around 4,000. That figure alone was staggering. It was more than double the city's normal mortality for early December. But as the months passed, statisticians and scientists began to look closer. E.T. Wilkins, a leading pollution expert with the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, charted death rates across London from December through February. His method was simple but devastating. He compared the number of deaths during and after the smog to the same period in previous years. The excess was impossible to ignore. By the end of winter, Wilkins found that an additional 8,000 people had died, victims whose passing was hidden in the background noise of city life. The total, now widely accepted, stands near 12,000. These were not just numbers, they were lives lost to a poison no one could see and few wanted to acknowledge. Government spokespeople faced mounting questions as the death toll rose. In official statements, they insisted the surge in fatalities was due to an influenza outbreak coinciding with the cold snap. Cabinet memos and Ministry of Health reports repeated the same line: flu season, not pollution, was to blame. But hospital pathologists saw a different story. Post-mortems revealed lungs packed with black soot and pus, airways blocked by tarry residue. Death certificates listed respiratory failure, bronchopneumonia, and acute bronchitis, diseases triggered by the toxic air, not a virus. Dr. Donald Acheson and other medical officers quietly circulated findings that the vast majority of deaths came from mechanical obstruction and infection, not influenza. Still, press releases and parliamentary answers clung to the narrative of coincidence. The truth, 12,000 lives lost to coal smoke, remained buried beneath layers of official denial. London's air is cleaner now, but the World Health Organization reports air pollution still claims 7 million lives each year. The lesson endures. Invisible threats remain, even when we forget. What we choose to breathe and who decides still shapes our survival. Let me know your thoughts below.